We record on air. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of the day, everyone. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active large-scale Scrum community, as initiated in New York City, USA, and has gone viral ever since. We have a very special guest today, to whom I would like to give a proper introduction. His name is James Gunaca. He's 20 years plus in product management and digital marketing. He's a veteran in this line of business. He has been working as a product leader at companies like Amazon, ExpressVPN, across the United States and Europe. Currently, he lives in Europe. Originally, James is from the US. James has built and led multiple product teams who have delivered global 0 to 1 products like Amazon Echo with Alexa AI Assistant, Apple Care Plus as a subscription, and more. Now, James coaches product managers on a mission to make better products for the world by helping professionals build and grow their careers in product management. So, with this introduction, without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to James, and I would like James to take it away. And everyone else, please keep your cameras on if you could, and your mics off, and please hold off your questions until later. Thank you very much, James. Over to
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gene, and thank you for having me. Wonderful to meet all of you. A couple other housekeeping things as well before we get started. Number one, definitely would suggest turning on the speaker view. There's a little video, or I guess right up here, instructions on how to do that in Zoom. And then feel free to go full screen. I'll be sharing some slides, and it's best quality if you can kind of see it so we know you're here. Also, I love seeing comments in the chat, so feel free to click some comments, look at questions. If you want, put them there. I'll make sure to kind of look through them. So when I get finished with the presentation, I can kind of look through those and see what else to answer. But as Gene said, we'll maybe take some questions at the end. But also drop some emojis, drop some reactions in real time. Let me know what the feedback is like. Zoom has great features and able to do that. But those are just some quick housekeeping things I wanted to talk about before getting into what you're all here to learn about, which today I'm going to be talking about Amazon's product operating models, right? And so this is intentionally a plurality because I read an article sometime last year by someone who's very famous or infamous, depending on who you ask in the product management space, Marty Kagan, about Amazon's product operating model. And I've seen a lot of people who have written about the way Amazon manages their business, the way they do product management. And having worked in 3 different parts of the company, in their US headquarters, in their European headquarters, I thought I would share a little bit more of an insight from behind the scenes to help you understand what it's actually like within the company. And so one other thing I guess I wanted to share before getting in. So I love, again, seeing comments from folks in the chat, but if those little notifications start to kind of give you a little bit of a distraction, like you might see right here, you can just click that little arrow icon next to the chat, and then it'll give you the option to turn off chat previews, at least for this call. So with that, let me just also next give you a brief summary of like who I am. Like obviously Gene talked about me earlier, right? 20 plus years in product management and marketing across the United States and Europe. Now I currently live in London, where I've been for a little over 2 years. And I've spent over 6 years as a career coach. And so I predominantly help product managers on career outcomes. But in my product management experience, actually was reflecting on this recently. Products that I've worked on have reached over 500 million customers in terms of devices being sold, subscriptions being used. And so that's really given me a lot of unique perspective on different ways in which teams deliver outcomes for customers and outcomes for the business. That QR code there is just my LinkedIn profile. So if we're not connected, but certainly welcome the chance to connect with you. So send me a message. Always love to hear from folks. But also, like Gene said earlier, a lot of the different things I've worked on include Amazon's Echo product. I was there before it launched in 2015 and was there working on that product family for the next 5 years. before moving to Europe when I switched businesses at Amazon, where I worked with their retail department and partnered with other companies like Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, and others to sell digital subscriptions on the website. But then when I left Amazon, I joined a company called ExpressVPN here in London, where I built and led product teams for things like a password manager, their core VPN product, internal experimentation tooling, and more. I also write for a publication called Mind the Product. I organize product events here in London and participate in product events like this online, virtually. And so, yeah, would love to connect with many of you. But that's me. The main reason you're all here today, perhaps, is because you wanted to learn a bit more about Amazon and the different product operating models that they have. The first thing, though, that I really just want everyone to kind of take away from today's talk, if you take anything, right, is that there is no such thing as a perfect product operating model, right? Amazon has multiple versions, as you'll learn today. You may encounter people who talk about the product operating model, but every company is different. Every product team is different, and every product team within a company can be different. And I think that is what I really want people to kind of take away from this today. So while we can learn from different companies and the way in which they may have operated, the ways in which they've achieved success or failures, right? When we try to emulate what we see could potentially be working, just know that that's something to test and learn from versus presuming that just because a team or a company did something in one way, that is sort of the secret to reaching successful product outcomes. So that's the number one thing. But I'm hopefully going to help bring you up to that level of thinking by going through three different core topics. So the first one, I just want to talk a little bit more about Amazon's history and some of the great successes that they've had, where their product thinking and their product model for these particular stories worked really well. So, first, and this is actually the one that's talked about in that Marty Kagan of the Silicon Valley Product Group article talked about, was the story of the Prime subscription and Prime membership, right? I'm pretty confident that many of you know what Prime is. Perhaps some of you are Prime members. But this story actually was something that took very many iterations to get towards, right? First, it was testing all different types of shipping benefits and trying to get customers to, pay for some kind of subscription model to get discounted shipping, because what Amazon thought customers valued deeply was getting your online orders faster than anywhere else you'd maybe purchased things online before. What might seem like table stakes now, getting something, in a day or even as little as an hour or two. This was like unheard of when Prime was actually launching. And at the time, like even 2-day shipping was something that was quite unheard of across the e-commerce space. So I won't go through the entire story of what happened with Prime, but this is one of Amazon's greatest successes, and it's grown into something that is unimaginable even when it started. Another big example of Amazon's product work in terms of success is AWS. Now, this business was built on the idea of, hey, Amazon is needing to run all these types of services. They need scalability. Things are growing rapidly, and the tools that they were using, that they were, outsourcing to different providers, just weren't built for the scale in which Amazon projected itself to grow. So it built Amazon Web Services as a means to help their business grow internally, but then decided to turn that to a product, which again is a different way in which they achieved some successful outcome that wasn't anticipated in terms of what it would turn out to be and how well it would lead to driving a good portion of the web that we all use today. And then the third story, and there's others, is Amazon Echo. So while these three success stories are maybe some of the most well-known, I know there's a lot of others, but this one, in fact, is one I'm very happy to have been a part of, because this was one of Amazon's breakout wins when it came to their devices business, right? So fast forward from 2015 to 2025, and there have been over 900 million Amazon devices, or excuse me, devices with Amazon Alexa built in around the world. And so massive success compared to some of the other categories that they've had, where they've got the Kindle e-readers, which is a successful device, but has really kind of reached its mass market appeal and did not reach kind of the device scale in terms of households as Echo did, nor did it happen as quickly. We went from 2015, where we had tens of thousands of devices, to hundreds of millions of devices within the next 2 years. So these are just some of the product successes that happened at Amazon, but there's a couple of other stories I thought I would share, and some of these are failures, right? So a company who has great successes probably also has great failures. And the most well known, at least I think, was the Fire Phone. In fact, this predated the Amazon Echo only by a year, and it only lasted for a year. This was 2014 when this phone came out. And it was sunset before the Echo even launched full time. No longer being talked about, wasn't being manufactured anymore. Once the stock sold out, it was no longer available for purchase. Amazon also entered into a restaurants business, competing with like Uber Eats and takeaway.com or Deliveroo or whatever other DoorDash, I think. Sorry, I'm used to thinking about some of the European variations of food delivery, but Amazon had their own version of this. And despite having a delivery network, which was being launched at the time with Prime Now, they weren't able to break into this category successfully. They have other examples too, right? They have what was called Amazon Scout. So this was a little delivery drone that they worked on from 2018 to 2023 about. And it's like, hey, they know delivery. They have this hardware business. Why couldn't they kind of crack this tight delivery despite 5 years of investment? So I share these stories, right? Three great successes and three variations of failures, one of which was arguably a quite a colossal failure in terms of investment and just how poor was received by customers. But oh, did I lose everybody? No, maybe my other screen just died. Give me just a moment here.
You good?
Yeah, I think oh no, my system just cut off my other display. I'll turn that back on. There we go. Sorry about that. So, takeaway here, like Amazon, despite its reputation for having great successes, they've also had great failures. In fact, the failures greatly outnumber the successes, right? So this kind of hits on a concept that I think is important for people to take away, which in order to achieve great success, you need to have some of those failures. You need to experiment with ideas. This was something I really enjoyed about working at Amazon, was that culture of experimentation and that emphasis on learning quickly, failing quickly, iterating all the time, in pursuit of trying to find things that were going to work really well. Now, I can't to how they apply that type of thinking today, since I've been away from the company for a couple of years now. But we certainly see less of that rapid pace of invention as we've had in years past. Next, like outside of the actual things they've done, Amazon is sometimes regarded for their ways of working. And from an insider's perspective, right, I remember actually before I joined the company, right, I had this vision of what it meant to work at a company like Amazon. But once I got in there and I spent a lot of time there, I realized there are myths of working at a company like Amazon, and then there are the facts. And I want to run through a few with all of you, just so you can understand a bit more from an insider's perspective. So, what is like the most common myth that you think exists about working at Amazon? Leave a comment in the chat. I'm be curious to know what you think like the biggest myth is, or just put any idea you have in there and let's see if it actually comes up in the list of ones that I brought for you today. So I'm going to go ahead with this myth first, which is no PowerPoint. Banned at the company. You're not allowed to create slides, right? Is this true? Is this not true? Right? Well, here's like the fact. There are no PowerPoints for critical decision making at the company, but there are absolutely still some PowerPoints. You want to run an all hands presentation, you're going to use slides. You're not going to send a 6-page document to run an all hands for an org or a company. I remember running sort of cross team, like I remember running an event where I was looking at how the design team and the product team were tightly coordinating with each other, and we had been growing a lot. And it was important that we talked about how our ways of working were going to change. And I'm meeting with 150 people or like presenting to that large of a team. And I'm not going to like send a document to all of them and have them read it all at the same time. I introduce some of these concepts through a presentation and then follow on and have places for people to ask questions. So was Jeff ever presented a PowerPoint as a means of trying to get his buy-in on something? No, like that would not happen. But it's definitely used within the company. Let's go for another one here. Common myth, no dates. So I've also seen product literature talking about how, oh, dates are bad, right? It should be about getting to the right outcome. And, dates are things that are arbitrary many times. And if you're like moving towards dates, then maybe you're taking shortcuts and you're not thinking things through. You're prioritizing a timeline versus an outcome. Well, what does it look like at Amazon? Well, in devices, in retail, in their people organization, dates are very much a thing all the time, everywhere. Like in devices, it was we want to launch things in September. Like that was the date. Prime Day is a date. You need to have things locked beforehand. In fact, I would sit in what are called global business reviews. So Amazon's well known for their weekly business reviews, their monthly business reviews, their quarterly business reviews, often used in acronyms as WBR, MBR, QBR. Well, in devices, at least for a number of years, they were running what were called global business reviews. This was every Friday morning, about 200 people, either in a room or on a call, would all sit and read a bunch of bullet points and a bunch of documents where there was basically takeaways and action items. And if you were writing some of the action items that would go in that document that would be reviewed up to our SVP, you would not put an action in there you were going to take without saying the date whereby it would either be finished or you would come back and sort of explain or provide another update on what's happening. And this was a means of driving accountability. And these would be sometimes product decisions, sometimes they'd be, not directly related to product work, but dates were very much a part of what was being used to drive accountability and drive progress quickly. Let's move on to another one. I've got a few more of these. So Amazon, they talk a lot about in their leadership principles this concept of customer obsession. And so an outsider perspective might think, hey, does Amazon really put the customer at the forefront of every decision that they make, either about products or about resolving problems or in the way they invest in things like customer service? Truth, the fact here is achieving business outcomes is the number one goal, but they do that by obsessing over their customers, by thinking deeply about the customer experience. One of the ways in which I kind of experienced this firsthand that I was kind of surprised by at first, because again, you come as an outsider and you have these perceptions of a company and the way they operate because of the way they talk about themselves. When we would launch a new device, there's the day, like the announce day, when the rest of the world finally discovers the things that we've been working on for years, and it kind of comes out in an announcement. And I remember Dave Limp, the SVP of devices, always talking about how important it was to optimize for the press on those launch days. Like we're opening up, we're taking orders from customers, but what we're optimizing for is the press. He's like, no, no, no. He's like, the detail page needs to be optimized for the press. The demo of the product needs to be optimized for the press. The gateway, which was the homepage of Amazon.com, needs to be optimized for the press. And this kind of like didn't sit right with me for a while. I was like, hey, how come like we're optimizing for the press? They're not the ones actually buying the product. So I'd eventually learned that his perspective was day one is the press because they're the ones who are going to go write about these products. They're going to review them when they come out. And that's going to set sort of the tempo, or that's going to set people's perceptions about those products for the years that follow from when they're out. So customers can't even really use the product on the day that we announce it. And so we would intentionally launch versions of the product detail page that we knew were not going to convert well, right? We would focus on optimizing the content on the detail page, the imagery that we would use about the device, not to actually drive a high conversion on that day, because we knew press would be taking screenshots. We knew press would just copy paste content from the website, and they would use that in how they would write about our products. And so then when we would ship them to customers, when that sort of first round of reviews started to come in, that's when we would start implementing all the experimentation, change parts of the product detail pages so that we would then optimize for what we really wanted, which was sell these devices to customers, run experiments with pricing, run experiments with messaging, and things along those lines. Here's another one. Every product starts with what's called a PRFAQ or a six pager. So, if you're not familiar with this mechanism at Amazon, the PRFAQ, which stands for press release, frequently asked questions, it's a common document template that starts with a one-page press release that's written about a product idea that you have or an investment that you're advocating for the company to make. That's written as here is what Amazon would release to the press on the day a new product or innovation launches. Now, you wouldn't just write these for something new for consumers. You would write these for something that you would build internally that actually would never be seen by external customers, but you would still write it like a press release. And there's a template that explains it. Then many other document types that are being reviewed in meetings with leaders. These would not always follow a PRFAQ format, but they would be constrained to 6 pages plus appendix. So a common belief people have is, oh, okay, every product decision probably starts with one of these two types of documents. Reality, though, they're used a lot, but mostly on bigger bets, right? If every single product manager needed to write a 6 page document for every new product or feature that they were going to do, we would just be inundated with doc writing and we would never get stuff done. Now, it's possible that today, because I do know some people that still work there, like they are now using some of their own Gen AI products to help with their writing. Maybe the speed of writing one of those documents is a little bit faster than it was in years past, but I still know that it's impractical to kind of go to that level of depth for every single product or feature change that's going to be launched or be even considered. So it's mostly on bigger bets, right? Ones where investment decisions are being made, maybe headcounts being funded, or big material changes in scope or vision are happening. And then here, let's getting into the tactical bits, right? Roadmaps. So I talked earlier about no PowerPoints. Well, what format do roadmaps actually take? And so a lot of people would think that, hey, heavy doc culture, roadmaps are always kind of in this narrative form. Truth is, though, some roadmaps are in docs, some are Excel, some use proprietary tools, and some even use third-party tools, which I've seen different teams at Amazon get away with contracting some third-party software like Appendo or Now Next Later from ProdPad, right? They maybe get some budget and they use some external service to work differently. And this is also what you're going to learn when I talk about my next topic. Teams have unlimited resources. So I was guilty of this one. I thought joining a company like Amazon, which when I started was 30,000 people, when I left, it was 1.3 million people. I thought, hey, I'm going to go work at this large company, super well known. They got lots of money. They're highly profitable, building cutting edge tech. I'm going to have access to the best of the best, right? No, teams are tightly constrained. They do not have unlimited resources, right? It's not like you can just wave a wand and say, great, now I've got an engineering team of 40 because I actually need it to deliver this thing. No, in most cases, you're going to have a small engineering team. Some teams I worked on had design, some people had research, some didn't. Some it was if you need to create some digital mock-ups of what it is you want to build, the product manager has to do that, or the product manager has to go beg, borrow, and steal resources from somewhere else in the company to get it done. So teams are tightly constrained in these ways, and there's not access to unlimited resources, and there aren't always the best tools. One of the things that was a shock to me was that I couldn't even collaborate on Excel spreadsheets in real time, like you would use in like a Google Sheets, until about 2021, when the Quip product, which I believe might be a Salesforce product, was rolled out across the company that at least would give you some variation of collaborative spreadsheet work. Everything else was on an old instance of SharePoint that you couldn't collaborate in real time on. And yeah, so best access to tools, not really, mostly just proprietary and very often inadequate. When Slack came to Amazon, I was so happy because first it was Skype for Business or Microsoft Link, actually, if you've ever used that when I started in 2015. And then Slack came along in 2022, and it was like finally, but then you had executives and other leaders sticking with what's called Amazon Chime, which just not does not compare to the speed and feature-rich product experience that you get with something like Slack. I think this might be the last one here. Amazon only hires the best, right? It's right there in their leadership principle: hire and develop the best. My favorite leadership principle, by the way. Reality, though, they try to hire only the best. I've worked with some amazing people that do not work at Amazon. I've worked with some terrible people who work at Amazon. Either terrible because they're just an asshole. I've written about this in the past. Or terrible just because, like, how did these people get through that really difficult hiring process? Did they know someone? Did the people they interview with, are they not good? Like, you'd be surprised the number of people you encounter where it's just like, how did this person get in here? Well, the reality is, like, no one can hire the best, and the best is also subjective. So while Amazon is regarded for their ways of working, they're not as consistent as you might think, right? And it really does vary based on the team you work on, based on the org you're in. And so if you're kind of reflecting, whether it be on Amazon or some other big company, it doesn't matter if it's a Google, Meta, or Microsoft, or one of the newer sort of growing, fast-growing companies like OpenAI or let's pick some fintechs here in the UK, like a Wise or whoever. Right? There's always going to be the outsider's perspective and then what it's actually like to work there. And I encourage people now that I work with, if you're sort of envisioning your career moving to one of these types of companies, to learn maybe by being around the best or having access to the best, just go validate some of those assumptions you might have by talking to people who work at those companies or have worked at those companies before making sort of consequential decisions for your career. Last thing I want to talk about, these three product operating model examples. So a lot of things I've talked about so far. Just wanted to highlight the great successes and great failures that came from different product operating models. Talked about, you know, how Amazon's regarded and what some of those myths are and what some of the facts are. But I'm going to spend the rest of the time just talking through three different product operating model examples based on my experiences working in three different divisions within the company. Before I do that, what do I mean by product operating model? What does that constitute? Well, if we like zoom out to just the phases of the product development lifecycle, you've got product discovery, product strategy, product delivery, right? That's the cycle. And then you have people, right? The different cross-functional teams and functions that exist within the company. So I mentioned earlier, I worked in three different parts of the business, right? And now I'm going to walk through each one and talk about these four different dimensions and how it was different and what each process was like, and maybe what kind of stakeholders were involved. This is also a great time as you might have questions about what it was like during these different parts of the company. Leave them in the chat, and I'd be happy to address them when we open up for Q&A. First up is Amazon Echo. So I worked on this product from 2015 until the end of 2019, so just about 5 years. What was the discovery process like on a product like this? Right. Well, the first iteration of Amazon Echo obviously was something we were conducting no product discovery with existing customers because it was something that was very tightly contained and was very secretive. We did not want external people to know that we were working on this product. If you kind of like rewind to 2015, what everyone was really focused on was like mobile apps, mobile phones, smartphones. Amazon had just kind of launched one of their own, but even I think it was 2 years before the Fire Phone launched, this product was already being worked on. And it started with this idea of creating a Star Trek-like computer for the home. And we didn't even know that what we were going to be creating and how we would talk about it as this concept of ambient computing, right? You have a computer device in your home that's just there and present that you can talk to. But that was kind of the vision. Hey, there's this device that's in the home, and then anywhere you are in the room within earshot, you can talk to it and it will return information to you. So you can't really conduct a lot of discovery with customers and ask about the problems that they're going to solve that maybe this type of solution would be fit for because you're trying to like tightly guard this investment. Like this product came out, I think 2 or 3 years before Google Home came out 3 or 4, I think, yeah, 3 or 4 years before the HomePod, right? And those are the only other devices in this category of like voice activated speakers that Amazon pioneered. So discovery wasn't something that we did by talking to customers. It was very much we're ideating, we're taking inspiration from different types of technology. And yes, Jeff Bezos is very much a Star Trek fan. And so there's a lot of inspiration that came from that that informed what we would do. The next part of discovery work that we would do, though, would happen internally. So an internal beta program was started where early prototypes of these devices would be shipped to employees who were under tight NDAs. They would then get a prototype of these devices, and then they would act as kind of an internal discovery mechanism. Like some people call this dog fooding, right? Sign this big document saying you're not going to talk to anyone about this. You get it in your home. And then we would run customer satisfaction surveys or CSAT surveys for the device, for different feature domains that we would try out. And we would, ship out new features that Alexa could do when we were testing sort of the voice recognition, thinking about, what the wake word was going to be. Should it be Alexa? Should it be Echo? Should it be computer? Should we let customers actually choose what their own wake word would be? Our discovery mechanism at that stage was all about, getting feedback from internal employees. And they could do this because, again, the company was so large that there was enough people that didn't even work on Amazon devices that would potentially be within our target customer segment that we thought would, be open to buying one of these types of devices. So that was a bit on discovery in the early days of Echo. If you move ahead to when we had sort of shipped these products to customers, how do we kind of do continuous discovery at that point? Well, then we start to leverage some more of the regular mechanisms that you would find. It's customer research surveys that we do, bring customers on site and kind of conduct interviews with them, get them to try new things, give them Amazon gift cards to fill out surveys or do other types of trials from their home. These types of mechanisms would be used. But still, anytime it had to do with new features or new experiences that we didn't want the public to know, we would rely on that internal product discovery mechanism. Strategy, though, for Echo was very much informed by what had we learned from strategy across other device businesses. That global business review I talked about earlier, that mechanism intentionally had people from different parts of the devices business. So you had Fire TV, you had Kindle, you had Fire tablets. At some point, you also had businesses like Dash Button in there, other devices, arms where there's been experiments. They would all kind of be there together, sharing the performance, the learnings, the wins, the failures, so that that learning could permeate across the organization so that they could learn. So the early strategies for Amazon Echo were driven by what was working for Fire TV, which was growing well at the time, and what didn't work for Fire Phone, right? And what was working for Kindle. From everything from pricing to promotion strategy to the experience on the website to communication with the press, all of these things, it would be what worked for these businesses. Let's try to apply it for Amazon Echo. And then finally, delivery. So this, when I talk about delivery, I mean like we're shipping things to customers. This was a new method that was employed for Echo. In the very early days, we would ship new features to customers every single week once this device started hitting some of our early customers. And in fact, the way we would announce it to customers was also something that was not necessarily unique, but certainly not Star Trek computer-esque. And so I actually remember this. This was just a little over 10 years ago. My first week, I'm kind of being told how we're going to do this is, oh, every Friday, we're going to send an email to customers who have early access to this product. And we're just going to tell them what new things they can do with Alexa. And we're going to like write some words in the email to say, hey, just say this to Alexa. And this is the new feature. And then once we started shipping these devices to actual customers and sending out these emails, this was like the only way they could figure out how to use features. Internally, across the teams, though, typical, code ship processes where we know what things we're going to try to launch. There's sprint mechanisms, there's testing plans, there's these CSAT scores that have to be met internally before we ship it out to end customers. And then once it's time to actually release it, we'll dial it up using a tool called WebLab and then test it within production devices that we have, all before we send this email out on Friday. But by the way, before you send that email out to customers, send it to Jeff Bezos first in case he has any feedback on what we're doing. And so our delivery process also involved gating feature announcements to customers until Jeff had been given some time to either give us feedback on the contents of the email or feedback on the features that we were prioritizing. Or sometimes he would ask questions around like, hey, how come you're not talking about this feature yet? A little bit of high stress every Friday morning for the first, I don't know, year and a half I worked at Amazon was waiting for Jeff to either write back or not write back at a time that execs would say, okay, we've given him enough time. Now you can deploy that message to customers. But this cycle, right? Okay, now we deliver things to customers. How does that feed into discovery? People would go on to Reddit right away within a couple of hours and start talking about these new features. The press, CNET, The Verge, Tech Radar, these types of businesses would start writing about these features in their articles. And it just kind of created this perpetual cycle. We started including customer tweets in that email. So customers would then go and talk about the product, and then we would feature them talking about the product. And this little email campaign constituted one of our like customer delivery or product delivery flywheels. And then finally, like people. In the early days, it was a tight team. A lot of people who had worked on Fire Phone when that business was being shut down, rather than making those jobs redundant, it was, hey, we've got this other big thing that we need a lot of people on. So people were given the opportunity to go work on that. And so that was helpful. But still, it was quite a tight team. And within the first 6 months of having launched this product, it wasn't until Prime Day, the very first Prime Day of 2015, where we understood that we were onto something and we were going to need larger teams. And the memory I have that kind of crystallizes this was on the morning of the first Prime Day, everyone was really worried about whether or not we were going to sell out of the deal. And if you've ever shopped on Prime Day, you know they have this little widget, right? For some deals, it says like, hey, this many deals claimed. It's like this little progress bar. And so there was concern that, maybe we haven't maybe we've picked too much of a quantity for this deal, and everyone's going to think that it doesn't sell. And it's going to look like, hey, no one wants to buy this product because here's this progress bar, no one's buying it. And so there was lots of debates, like how many do we actually put on sale? Well, the morning of Prime Day, around 6 a.m., I think it was, we broke that widget. That widget broke because it sold out so fast, the widget could not keep up. And then we had to like add more stock, and pretty much all morning was how can we add more units? How can the systems update fast enough so we can get more of these devices into people's hands? And that was kind of an early indicator that it was going to take off. And so the people that we had would grow tremendously, right? The devices organization at its peak was over 10,000 employees, but around this time, it was just a fraction of that amount. So as it grew, we had design resources, research resources, machine learning engineers, data scientists, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, anything that we needed. It was a really easy sell to get it in terms of headcount or resources as more devices, more form factors were greenlit for investment. So that was Amazon Echo. When I left the United States in 2019, I moved to Europe where I went and joined the video games and software business. And so this is basically a part of the retail arm of Amazon. So if you're on the retail marketplace, you're shopping for things like, the latest Xbox games, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, or digital software like McAfee's antivirus software or Microsoft 365, which formerly Microsoft Office, Adobe Creative Suite, all the digital versions of these products was the business that I was working in as an arm of consumer electronics. Now, that team was split between Seattle, and we had some folks in EU where I was moving to, and then we had some folks over in Japan, and much smaller org, right? This was I think around a 30 to 40 million a year business. And we had an engineering team that had been cut down from, I think, 120 engineering down to like 60, spread across four PMs. We had no dedicated design teams. We had no dedicated researchers. Sales was very much involved with the product roadmap. I had 70% tech debt, right? So very different organization. Lots of pressure to really automate as many things as we can. Despite at the time joining, this was just before the next generation of consoles that were launching. You had the Xbox One X and then One S. You had PlayStation 5 coming out. No rumors of a new Nintendo, although those perpetuated for years until this week, actually. Um, so our discovery process was pretty much what does the sales team want us to do? Because what are the customers, which are basically sellers, what are they saying they want? We weren't really doing much in customer discovery at all. We would just analyze how customers were using the retail website and maybe compare that to some other trends we'd see across the website to think about what innovations we should have on the retail customer experience. When it came to strategy, right there was no kind of overall retail strategy other than automate as much as possible. There was a business strategy for, hey, we want to try to get more market share of digital sales. We want to try to, get in on this subscription revenue from a software standpoint. But this didn't really materialize in kind of a product strategy. And the product team was very much looked at as like doers, executors. I kind of didn't know this. This was not what it was communicated to me when I joined that team. Uh, and I also didn't know, like I said, that there was going to be 70% of tech debt. So we even had a very small amount of tech resources to actually build and innovate on things. And so that was a very difficult process to work through. From a delivery standpoint, like how did we actually get things shipped out? Oh man, I remember sitting in my first roadmap meeting with my then director, my other PMs. We had a TPM who was in there, and then there was my boss. And I'm like new to the team, so I'm just standing by watching. And I'm in a conference room because this was pre-COVID, so we still all met in person unless people were out of the country and worked remotely. And they just like bring in these printouts of like this like really long Excel with like hard to read text. I had to get them, some glasses out to read, and it was multiple pages. And I'm just like, what are we working on? Why is there so much stuff in here? I'm expecting our director is just going to like run us through the mud. He was quite polite. I was very thankful for, but it was just like the information's wrong, then there's like missing hours, and it's like there's no strategy. It's just like, hey, here's a list of stuff we're working on and what the status is of each. And so like that as a mechanism was absent of strategy, and it was unclear that what the tech teams were prioritizing and why. And so that was requiring a lot of transformation work over the coming weeks. And that really required like tight relationships between product and tech and business from a people aspect. But we never kind of got over that challenge of not having another important function to product, which was design. And so in those cases, PMs just had to do what they could with their resources, maybe take a class and learn how to use Sketch at the time. Because I think this was like pre-Figma, pre-Miro. Certainly couldn't go ask some AI tool to create a wireframe for you back then. And so this made it really difficult for us to achieve outcomes. But again, the big distinction here is one part of the company, massive resources, have access to all the kinds of talent that you need, massive growth. And then the next business is the mechanisms are not tight, the tools are non-existent, the tech debt is super high. And how do you still manage to achieve value and drive results in that kind of situation? Final one. So I worked in that video games and software business for a couple of years before being approached by a former manager from Devices who had switched over to Amazon's People org, which is now called Amazonian Experience and Technology. We built products for employees to use. And up until the time I moved into this part of the business, and the reason why I did it was because I was told, hey, look, Amazon is finally deciding to invest like legit resources into building products internally with the same quality bar that we want to build things for external customers so that we can empower employees to be more effective. Because at that point, even the number of corporate employees had grown from 30,000 to 300,000, but the entire employee base at the company, including fulfillment centers, et cetera, was over a million. So discovery. Now I had user researchers again. I had designers. I had a well-stacked engineering team. I had content partners because I worked on an internal search product that was used by that entire employee base. Strategy wise, we would do planning and we would think about what was going to drive the most impact. This was reviewed up to our SVP. They were kind of weighing in on decisions. And then delivery, right? We had clear roadmap. It was something that we would iterate on based on what we learned. And when we would ship things to internal employees, there was ways for them to discover how they were using. There was feedback mechanisms built into our products. So it was much more well encompassing in terms of our product operating model. Uh, People wise, though, we had access to all these different types of people, and there was lots of different types of resources. But towards the end of my time here is when everything started to change at Amazon. So I launched this new internal search product under the dark cloud of the first round of layoffs in November 2022. Uh, so it wasn't long after that I, at least me personally, decided this is no longer the place for me. For many other reasons I won't bore all of you with today. But I tell all these stories, I tell this information, and I just want to bring you back to the important thing I shared earlier, right? There's no such thing as a perfect product operating model. And there's no company where the product operating model at scale is consistent, right? And some of the myths you may have heard about Amazon, well, hopefully today you know a little bit more about the reality and the facts of what it's like working in there. But I do want to talk about what does work. What are the things that I saw consistently work, both there and in other places, and in the ways in which I work with people who work at all different kinds of companies now. I work with people in startups, scale ups, also big tech in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, right? And so I now have this perspective over the past couple of years of working with so many different PMs around what are some of the things that do work consistently and reliably. Number one, strong document writing leads to sharpened thinking. So I'm not saying throw away your PowerPoints forever, but when you have deep thought work to do, writing it down cannot be understated with respect to the value that it can drive to sharpen your thinking. And now it's actually easier to use tools like LLMs to help with some of that writing, help refine the language and tighten it up. I didn't have that when I was writing 6 pagers, but certainly now I would use it. Next, business value needs to precede customer value, especially in the realities of today where investment capital has dried up, right? Unless you're working on an AI company, and results have to be proven up to levels of leadership beyond just your product leaders. So like it needs to start with business value before you kind of get into the value that it's going to drive for your customers. Because without customers, you don't have a business. But if you're not driving value for the business, your work's going to get cut. And then finally, clear ownership leads to better outcomes. So, one of the things that was consistent across the product operating models that were successful was very clear ownership. Single threaded owner is a concept at Amazon I encourage you to look up. This basically says, like, the internal way to describe it by some was the single throat to choke, which meant like someone is going to be accountable for solving a problem or achieving some kind of outcome because by doing that, it makes it easier to reach outcomes and to drive accountability. So these are 3 things that I think are good to take away and apply no matter where you work or what you do. That's all from me today. I want to thank you all. I'd be happy to take some questions. And also, I greatly value feedback. And so this is a QR code to leave a review and just give me some feedback on this talk. But with that, I would like to turn it over to Gene for any feedback as well as to help moderate some questions. I'll take a look at the chat as well. But thank you
Uh,
again so much for having me.
oh,
Um,
great having you, James. Thank you very much. not much to add other than folks, we got about seven, let's push it to 10 minutes of talk time. Please raise your hand and be succinct in your questions directed at James. Be specific, and let's go in the order. Whoever is, just yell out if you would like. Just
I see some in the chat as well, which I'd be happy to
yeah.
answer.
What's in the chat is it's a lot.
I see one from Glenn I'd be happy to take, but yeah, maybe
Yeah,
even
please.
try the hand raise feature and we can queue it that way. So this
Sure.
one was from Glenn. Does Amazon implement the Tesla style go direct to the person you need to talk to? If their manager complains, tell me and I'll fire them. This is more of a internal like policy thing, but it's actually really hard to find at a company with hundreds of thousands of employees, like who the person to actually go talk to is. You see something that breaks on the website or that's not right. This would happen a lot. It would just like kick off this like email thread until it goes like director to director, 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 till it finds who actually is responsible for it. And now you're like going back through this chain. And it's like, hey, is this something I need to actually prioritize fixing? Or now do I have to waste some of my time getting back to someone to say, here's why that is not a priority for us, despite it being something that looks like a defect in front of customers. Let's maybe take one from the queue. Uh, Gene, did you see a little looks like, Karen, I see you up
Yeah,
first.
Karen is raising, yeah. If she's the next one, sure.
So I'd like to change my question a little bit to how would you describe the evolution of culture at Amazon? And was it different in the teams that you worked on? Yes, I guess it is. Um, and why?
Sure. Great question. So there's company culture, there's team culture, right? And so the Amazon leadership principles are probably the biggest and most impactful cultural artifact that they have. And these exist in their hiring process. It exists in their talent management processes. It also exists in some of the decision-making processes. So there's consistency with respect to that part of Amazon culture. When you zoom into like product culture or org culture, or even team culture, this is where it starts to variate a ton, right? I worked for some really amazing, inspiring leaders who was so thankful to have worked for them. And I worked for, I think, what I called a group of psychopaths, like assholes, and I forget the third term, but like very like not helpful people who or that's what it was, psychopaths, empire builders, and assholes, right? And you can read about some of these on Blind if you use it.
No
And so
narcissist, narcissist. No.
that's yep, that exists too,
I don't.
right? Some that I still see out there, publicly sometimes on the stage talking about different things. And I'm like, hey, I remember being in meetings with those people and seeing how they like operate internally. And so those exist. And I even heard some horror stories from people that I would, later manage. They'd come to my team, they'd explain things that they experienced before. And I was like horrified. There was also this huge New York Times article that was published in 2015, the year I started. And then I, started having to answer questions in hiring interview loops and some of my direct reports about stories. And I never doubted that those stories were true. It's just I never personally experienced a lot of those things for a while that I worked there, but eventually I experienced some parts of it. Now, zooming back out, one thing that I think has changed a lot about Amazon, at least since the early time that I was there, was their willingness to make big bets. I don't think you've seen as big of bets from Amazon, whether it be in devices or other parts of the business, as you had seen from, say, 2015 to 2020. And a lot of this kind of manifested starting with the layoffs that happened at the end of 2022. And that even still today, I won't be surprised if Amazon has another big round of layoffs this year. We've already seen Microsoft do it. There's rumors of Meta doing another round. Uh, while Amazon currently is hiring more product management positions than any other of those companies I've mentioned so far, there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't like again make a big cut on some parts of the company. And you even see in their public shareholder letters and with Andy Jassy getting out in the public, he even made this comment of we're not going to make investments decisions just because the technology is like interesting. And I think that is very different than kind of the like Echo was created because the technology was interesting. And that created a huge and massive business for the company. Maybe today it's not where it could be compared to where it was leading towards for those first few years. But I do think that represents a shift in the mindset of the company. These opinions are my own, by the way. Uh,
Thanks so much.
Thank
Is
you.
that a big uh-oh for you?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is that a big uh-oh, like taking
Oh,
research away from NIH? It's like uh-oh,
uh,
you know?
yeah. Well, for me, it's more of just like I always have to like toe this line of here, these are opinions that are my own. I'm under no obligation to like say or not say certain things. But yeah, like I don't think the company as a whole, as an outsider looking in now, they're not moving at the pace that they have in the past. And some of their rigidness is going to affect what we'll see from them in the future. I think they're still an amazing company. They're delivering amazing results. They're still like wildly successful. And from a career lens, like there's still plenty of value for some people to work at a place like that. But is it for everybody? It never has been and never will be. It's certainly not for me anymore.
Thank you.
Hey, Alan, I'm sorry, James. We want to maybe take another. I know there's at least three in the queue. Make a choice.
Sure,
Javier
I'll
or
take
Glenn.
Mentos. I see Mentos. He's up on the screen. Let's take yours, and I'll try to be more concise in my answers.
Yes, it's a quick question. As I have a lot of discussions with my customers around these things, how do you think the operation model depends on getting your continuous integration delivery and your automated testing right? Because people are still arguing and discussing with me, oh, can we skip on the automatic testing part? And I think it's just silly. What
Mm.
do you
Yeah, usually you want to wait for something to have gone wrong, right? So I think a willingness to bend a bit on processes or mechanisms that you probably have an inherent belief are good, like good discipline. I agree with you. Like automated testing, regression testing, these types of things will help reduce errors later. But if there's like pressure to pull back on some of those things, what I have found to be successful is a willingness to try different things, communicating your position of what you think may or may not happen, but then letting things fail sometimes as a means of saying, all right, we'll pull back on this, but document these types of decisions so that when something later on happens that goes wrong, it's like, hey, remember that we made this decision, and so now we should like put this back into place, uh, rather than trying to put a strong stake in the ground and say this is why we should stick to this way of doing things. Because you could be surprised to find that, hey, maybe pulling back on some of those mechanisms could maybe free up time to do other things. You sometimes just don't know.
Thanks.
Sure. I think Javier, I see his next.
Hi, thank you. So, do you actually use working backwards and famous strategy, and especially for roadmaps and maybe 2, 3 year strategy? That was my question. Thank you.
Sure. So the PRFAQ mechanism I talked about before is something that helps ensure that we're thinking first about what is the experience going to be when like we're launching and work back from there. So you start with the vision of what you want to have happen, and then you build a plan that gets you there, knowing that that plan will change over time. It doesn't always work this way, though. Like I said, sometimes it's the big bets that are the ones that we did that type of rigid and sort of methodical planning. But a lot of times, yeah, you start with the outcome you're trying to achieve and you work back and say, what's the plan that I need to follow to get there? Whether or not now is like the last question or not, I do want to say I'd be happy to answer more of your questions. Send me a message on LinkedIn or connect with me, and I'd be happy to kind of get back to you when I can. But Gene, I'll turn it back over to you. I also had muted you because I heard some background noise, so you might want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry, James. Let's take Glenn's one more, and that's we're gonna call it a day after Glenn because he's been trying to ask you.
Great. Yes. Glenn, what can I answer for you?
Thanks, James. Just to follow on to the earlier question, that I would position this way. If you were running the place, if suddenly Jeff brought you in to replace Andy Jaffe, what would you change? I was particularly intrigued by your comment around rigidity and no longer looking for interesting technology. That doesn't seem like a good move for me, and I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, I'll just say first off that I don't think I'm a great candidate for running a company like Amazon. I would feel incredible imposter syndrome. But if I were in such a position, it's a very interesting question. If I were in such a position, I think I would kind of go back to, hey, look, a company of this scale has flexibility to invest. And I would the original shareholder letter from Jeff, and I think it was 1997, made this statement that they kept in shareholder letters, and they probably still keep that copy in that one. I don't think they'll ever take that away. But the ethos of it, I don't think is as strong as it was once was, which basically said we're going to trade short-term value to achieve long-term value. Like, so we're fine losing money because we're going to make long-term bets. I don't feel like what we heard from Andy Jassy is representative of that same mindset, but it's because it's a different company, it's a different leader, despite Andy having been there for so long. So if I were to kind of be in that position, I would want to go back to that. I would want to say a company of this size and this scale, there's a handful of them in the world. And what can we achieve as a company that can add value to the world and thereby our shareholders that no one else can do? And trying to really empower that ethos in employees versus what I have been seeing more of in what I saw in like my final days there internally was just like how can we like clamp down on as many things as possible and try to be as tight as possible because we care so much about what's going to happen to the shareholders this quarter or next quarter or in 1 year from now, not 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
I was hoping you'd say that. My sentiment exactly.
Glad to hear that we're aligned on that one.
Well, thank you very much. So, folks, at this point, I apologize. We cannot take any more questions because we need to time box it and call it a day. I want to personally thank James for coming out and doing this great talk for us. Anyone who wants to ask James questions, please reach out to him on LinkedIn. I know he's pretty accessible, or in some other ways, and do it directly. On this note, I'm going to wrap up the event. Thank you very much for joining, James. Special thanks to you. And if you have any assets, of course, you can send them over to me and I'll make them available, as always.
Thank you so
very
much.
much, and be well, be safe, and we'll see each other soon.
Take care, everyone. Thank you again.
Cheers.